It looks good. Is there, I know it's 1:30 now. Are you ready to begin? Do you need a little time?
I'm okay to begin.
Hello? Oh, I'm sorry, the Wi-Fi here is so spotty. I apologize.
That's okay. It's Caitlin. I said I'm ready to begin if we're able to.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that once more?
We're ready to begin.
Oh, wonderful. Let me introduce you. Thank you for your patience. And again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. So let's begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 26th Annual NYSTRA Conference. My name is Dorothy. I will be the moderator today. Please mute yourself when you are not speaking. If you have any questions, either raise your hand and send me a message on the chat. Please comment your name in the chat and complete the attestation form and email it to nystra2022@gmail.com. You can fill out and send them in one email before April 19th. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can find the attestation form on our website and do not need to comment your name. Without further ado, today's session is New Jersey's Path to Recreation Therapy Licensure. Our speakers today are Caitlin, and I apologize if I mispronounce your last name, Folst. Caitlin has been a certified therapeutic recreation specialist since 2012. She has been working as a recreational therapist at Children's Specialized Hospital since 2012. She previously worked on the infant toddler team at the inpatient rehabilitation site in New Brunswick, New Jersey until April 2018, when she transitioned to the role of manager of community recreation programs in Mountainside, New Jersey. Caitlin is also the Union County Coalition Leader for Safe Kids Worldwide. She assisted with creating and implemented evidence-based practices for program improvement surrounding a water safety curriculum for the Adaptive Aquatics program offered through Community Recreation Services. Caitlin was a board member on New Jersey EPA TRA as the New Jersey member at large from 2014 to 2021 and assisted with achieving New Jersey state licensure for recreational therapy on January 21st, 2020. In May 2016, Caitlin received her master's in public administration, health administration from Keene University's Nathan Weiss Graduate College. She completed her internship at Children's Specialized Hospital and graduated with a BA in Recreation Administration, Therapeutic Recreation in 2011. Thank you for being here, Caitlin, and we're excited for your presentation.
Thank you, Dorothy. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm also joined by two of my colleagues, Pam Griffin and Dina Trenzo. Without them, definitely this process would have been a lot for me and a little confusing. They are my mentors and were a very integral role in this whole process. So they'll be presenting as well. So let's get started. We're going to talk about our path to rec therapy licensure. The session objectives for today is to define the importance and significance of becoming a licensed profession, discuss the importance of a lobbyist and their role in the legislative process, and identify actions that can be taken to contribute to licensure efforts. So why is licensure necessary? The big point is consumer protection. That's the main point. So the big supportive data that we were able to find that was really helpful for our licensure efforts was finding the distinction between certified, a Ctrs, and individuals and professionals that were saying that they were providing recreational therapy but were not Ctrs. So we went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and in May of 2019 there was 520 rec therapists employed in New Jersey, but we found when we cross-checked that with the NCTRC database, as of November 2020, there were 341 CTRS, and that means that there's 179 potentially practitioners that are unqualified and unregulated practicing recreational therapy. And that's not being regulated, it's not being monitored. We don't know what types of services or quality they're providing to the consumers. So consumer protection is the biggest factor. What is the difference between certification versus licensure? So a few key points. Certification is not required to practice rec therapy. A state licensure is not optional. It is required to practice recreational therapy. So again, that consumer protection, it goes back to that. The national certification it's peer reviewed and it's sanctioned, whereas state licensure, there are fines or legal prosecution for any violation. Again, consumer protection. It's necessary for employment in some settings, the certification, and then the state licensure it's a requirement. There is no way around it. So again, consumer protection. So as of 2020, there are now 5 states across the United States that have recreational therapy licensure processes. So Utah received theirs in 1975, North Carolina in 2005, New Hampshire in 2008, Oklahoma in 2010, and then we joined in 2020. Some of the other allied health professions that are currently licensed in New Jersey are PT, OT, speech, rec, art therapists, dance and drama therapists, music therapists, and now us, rec therapists. So it kind of puts us in the same playing field as these other allied health professions. So New Jersey licensure, how did we get here? What were our efforts and how were we able to make this happen? It was a grassroots effort that began more than 20 years ago. Pam and Dina are going to speak to that later as to their experience. They were involved in that climate and can talk about how it was back then, and then we started back up in probably 2015. So what we did was we discussed it at our rec therapy conferences and workshops. We had a spring workshop where we had somebody from New York actually come in and talk about the things that, and the steps that they had taken and what was successful and kind of where they hit some obstacles and what they did to try to overcome it and their process overall. From that workshop, we then conducted a licensure survey to gauge the support and the interest of the New Jersey professionals to see who's interested, who's available, and who can help us take on this beast of a challenge. So from there, we formulated our Licensure Committee. And it was comprised of 8 professionals from various settings: pediatrics, community, academia, school settings, adult skilled nursing facilities, and adult behavioral health, to give us a more robust committee that would be able to speak to all of the different settings and some regulations and things that we would need to consider during this process. Dina, I'm going to pass it over to you on some of our main discussion points.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. Dina Trenzo. I'm from Somerset County Park Commission here in New Jersey. And I've been with this agency for 33 and a half years. Yes, when you get in the field this long, you start counting those halves. But as Caitlin mentioned, Pam and I go way back as far as trying to get licensure for recreation therapy in New Jersey. And what had kind of happened in this grassroots approach is Caitlin coming in as, you know, the youth into our profession, excited and wanting to make a difference and try licensure again, approached myself and Pam. And so I think Pam and I both see ourselves as kind of being the facilitators through this process and guiding this group of people in this direction so that they can learn it also. But I think those 3 words on your screen right now, discussion, really describes what occurred. Weekly, at night, having all of our meetings were at night, having night meetings to Zoom calls, conference calls to really sit and discuss. What are some of the things we talked about? The biggest one for us at first was, can we do this on our own, or can we do it or do we need a lobbyist to do this? And if we need a lobbyist, do we have the funds for that? And do we fundraise? Do we ask all our members to start contributing and making a donation to the affiliate to help us with that? What was going to be the best approach? The second thing we discussed is it the right time? We really had to evaluate the political climate. And we knew back many years ago, it wasn't the right time. And we knew when, for those that are on here that happen to be from New Jersey, when Governor Christie was in, Pam and I knew that it wasn't the right climate. He was not about licensing any professionals anymore. He wanted to keep it where it was and not move it. So we knew with him, we were going to have a hard time getting it moving through. Then who would sponsor our bill in the Assembly and the Senate? Did we have connections to anyone? Because it's in the political arena, it is a lot about connections. So we had to brainstorm those ideas. And it wasn't just connections of ourselves on the committee, but anybody that was also helping or are members of our association. What other allied health professions would support us? Which ones would block us? Would it be activity professionals, music therapists, art therapists? Could we talk to them to gain support, their support? And we also talked about occupational therapists. We knew they were going to be one of our greatest challenges. And it's something Pam and I had seen in years past. And that was always in the back of our heads, at least for Pam and I. I think we were the you know, for lack of a better word, almost like Debbie Downer with it, saying, but what about the OT? But what about those OTs? So that was a concern of ours. How could we talk to them and gain their support? Well, one of the things that came up was, yeah, we could talk to them, but we could also have, if we have a lobbyist, we could have our lobbyists talk to their lobbyists. So that was another thought. What organizations can we contact for letters of support? We knew we needed to have some of that. And as Caitlin mentioned, this was about consumer protection. This wasn't about increasing jobs for rec therapists. This wasn't about salary increases. This was about consumer protection. So we looked at facilities that employ rec therapists. We looked at state universities that have that curriculum. In New Jersey, the only one is Kane University. And luckily, they also have a very supportive public affairs team at Kane University, and were willing to work with us also. We looked at the local chapter affiliates. We looked at national organizations such as ATRA. And we also looked at how might this impact the current professionals. We had to think about that. You know, are there people out there working as quote rec therapists, but that aren't CTRSs? How are we going to deal with that? Do we grandfather them in or not? And how do we prepare for the battle ahead with all of this? Because we knew there would be a battle. In our eyes, we really were convinced there would be a battle. One of the other things that we also discussed was how do we, if we move forward, how do we put it out there? And one of, I have to say probably, I know it was, I brought it up the most and it was my pet peeve, was do we put it on social media or not? I know Licensure had a licensure page, but that was a concern of mine because I kept saying, social media, occupational therapists seeing it. We already knew what was happening with the occupational therapists trying to block recreation therapy licensure across the country. We had talked to colleagues, we knew what was happening. But I have to say, we made a decision to not put anything out on social media. It would all be done via email and using whoever were members of NJEPA, getting anybody that maybe wasn't, but also a CTRS through NCTRC. So we really worked hard to plan for that battle. Next one, Caitlin. Thanks. So to answer some of those questions, the first bullet, you'll see it there. We decided to partner with the New Jersey Recreation and Park Association to contract with MBI who was the legislative services company agency for NJRPA. In full disclosure, at that time, we were very lucky. Pam happened to be the executive director of NJRPA, and I was on their board. And actually, throughout this process, I was a board member and then became president of NJRPA. But it was the right decision and the right fit because we had the connections and the resources to be able to work with MBI. It would have been very hard for the affiliate to come up with the money that they would have to go as out on their own to do. You know, lobbyists look at political connections, and there's none of that for NJEPA, and understandably so. So it was the right decision to partner, and we were able to get an amendment to our contract with them, and for a very reasonable fee, to add that as part of the scope of work for MBI. And New Jersey EPA paid NJRPA for that. So we were very lucky that MBI was so gung-ho about this and felt it was so needed that they really wanted to make this partnership work. So we researched a lot of other RT licensure bills as well as other allied health and professions for language and verbiage. And I have to say, I'm going to give kudos to Pam Griffin because she took the lead in writing it all. We just, I think Caitlin and I just reworked words and helped tweak it and all, but she really took the lead and gets the kudos. Okay, we have a severe, I apologize for that. We're all getting severe weather alerts across our phones for snow squalls. So I apologize for that noise in the background.
Snow squall warning until 2:15 p.m.
Anyway, we then, so we really dug deep into that. We obtained a list of NCTRC CTRSs that were in New Jersey and sent out a survey. We wanted to know, where do you work? Where do you live? Because that could be two different areas, district areas from a legislative perspective. How many CTRSs work at your place of employment? Would you be willing to speak and be involved if we needed you, or to be a point of contact to a specific assembly person or Senate person? So we drafted that licensure bill back in 2017. We created talking points. We created fact sheets, position papers, email templates. We try to make it as easy as possible for our members to be a part of this process, so that they could, it wasn't just a few voices that were making those calls when the bill was going to be introduced, but calls of other members. We obtained those letters of support from NCTRC, ATRA, and the board of NJEPA TRA. So slowly, as we were walking through this process, we slowly had to take our group. Yes, it was a part of NJEPA, and yes, I represented also the NJRPA side of it, but we had to slowly start working our way away from being connected with a professional association, because that works best many times to be that. We went through the database and to determine who lived in what district, contacted those individuals about approaching for sponsors of support. So we had team members doing that for us. We had color charts of having to figure out, okay, what was red again and what was yellow? They color coordinated everything, so we knew who we could go to for it. Our representative for legislative services for MBI is Rick Wright, and he still is today. And he arranged a meeting with Assemblyman Herb Conaway, who is a medical doctor, and asked if he would sponsor this bill. He agreed, and they introduced it into the Assembly on January 9th, 2018. It was then referred out to committee. And Caitlin, I think you're up next.
Thanks, Dina. Yeah, so after it was introduced, the final push on October 15th, 2018, myself and two other CTRS, along with an NJRPA member who is also a parent of a child with a disability, testified before the Assembly Committee. So the bill was then voted out of committee and sent to the full Assembly for a vote, and the bill passed in the full Assembly almost unanimously, actually. So then Senator Troy Singleton agreed to sponsor the bill in the Senate at the request of Assemblyman Conaway, And throughout 2019, our lobbyist, Rick Wright, was essential during this point. He made continuous efforts, phone calls, emails, meetings, et cetera, for the bill to be heard in the Senate committee. The bill was voted out of committee and sent to the full Senate for a vote. And then January 6th, 2020, myself and 2 other Ctrs, along with our lobbyist, Rick Wright, went back to the full Senate. We went for the full Senate vote, and it was passed with amendments. So on that same day, the bill returned to the Assembly for a full vote with the amended language, and the bill passed. So the Governor Phil Murphy, signed the Recreational Therapist Licensure Act into law on January 21st, 2020.
Caitlin, just to reiterate that the individuals who did go to testify, both Lucy and Lauren either worked or resided in Assemblyman Conaway's district. And that's why we went to them and said, hey, can you help us out and talk? Because that's extremely important, that they need to know that somebody who either votes for them or doesn't vote for them was there, and somebody with influence in their district. And Senator Singleton was also housed in that district and had an office with Assemblyman Conaway. So there was definitely already a relationship there. We were just really lucky that they gave us an appointment in the beginning through the lobbyist. So I just want to reiterate, people might not understand why we pick certain people to go, but you have to be very strategic in that plan.
And Caitlin, if I can jump in and add, because you mentioned about amendments, that to understand where the amendments came from. We proposed this bill as our own self-standing bill to go to be our own recreation therapy board. And we were told, again, because we had a lobbyist, that the governor was more apt to sign through pieces of legislation that weren't going to cost them a lot more money to have to staff it, because remember, it's a paid staff position then. So they asked us if we would be willing to kind of come together, because at that time, art therapy already had their licensure, but dance, drama, and music were also going for licensure. So we agreed. We didn't care what committee we fell in. We didn't care where our committee was, what group we fell under within the state. We just wanted to be licensed rec therapists, because that's all that mattered for us. So that's what the amendment was. That's why we had to amend the bill, to change it from being our own board to, which you'll see from now, coming up, the Creative Arts and Activities Therapy Board.
Yes, thank you. So the title of the piece of legislation is called the Recreational Therapist Licensing Act, and those are the 2 bill numbers there below the Assembly and the Senate bill, and then at the bottom is the link to the actual bill on the state website. Try to copy and paste and put it in the chat later on, or we can have the moderators or the NYSTRA conference individuals send it to you guys. So just to go over kind of the language, as Dina had mentioned before, we looked at other state bills for the language and the verbiage. So this is just a summary of how we worded everything and presented it. So you know, we made sure to include some key phrases, such as restoring or remediating an individual's participation levels in rec and leisure activities, reducing and eliminating limitations or restrictions to participation, and using rec modalities in design intervention strategies to maximize those domains and those areas for participation. We also thought it was important to define what recreational therapy services actually meant. So we defined it as meaning those services provided for the purpose of accomplishing recreational therapy goals. Again, some key terms including conducting individualized assessments for the purpose of collecting data necessary for the course of action for their treatment plan, planning and developing an individualized rec therapy treatment plan that identifies their goals, objectives, and the treatment intervention, implementing an individualized rec therapy treatment plan that is consistent with the overall treatment plan, so also highlighting that we are part of that interdisciplinary team, and systematically evaluating and comparing the individual's response to that rec therapy treatment plan and making modifications as appropriate. We also included developing a discharge plan in collaboration with the individual and the individual's family, treatment team, and other identified support networks where appropriate, identifying and training in the use of adapted play, recreation, and leisure equipment. So again, a lot of those key terms to make sure that we were defining rec therapy, and as we are a distinct therapeutic service and profession versus some of the other professions where there may be some confusion. Identifying, providing, and educating individuals to use play, recreation, leisure, and community resources that support a healthy, active, and engaged life. Providing leisure education and counseling to address issues that hinder health and engagement in those areas. Providing community integration, reintegration, inclusion, and transition services for rec, play, and leisure. And related community activities was a big one. I think that that's definitely something that we stand out for between the other allied health professions and kind of sets us apart and is extremely important in our profession. And addressing functional skill recovery, development, or maintenance related to health and participation in play, rec, leisure, community activities using those areas to advance health and functioning. Assisting individuals in constructing a healthy leisure lifestyle that supports continued recovery, health promotion, and quality of life. Providing play, rec, and leisure opportunities for individuals with illness, disability, or challenges for a therapeutic purpose, and consulting with groups, programs, organizations, and communities to improve those domains for accessibility and rec and leisure activities. So again, we also defined related community activities as those activities necessary for individuals to participate in recreation and leisure at home and in the community. Again, a very important term for us as rec therapists and also sets us apart from the other allied health professions. Now you're up again.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Couple of things before we get it fully into this slide. As we were doing our research and all, I came across a piece, and it was, unfortunately, it was linked to the Occupational Therapy National Association page. I didn't save the document, and of course now it's removed. But as I mentioned earlier, we found there was a push nationally for, through the National OT Association on, for lack of a better words, trying to block or hold up the licensure of recreation therapists across the country. And I found this article that they wrote and basically said, this is what you need to do, this is why, and they spelled it all out. But there was one clause I found in the bottom, and Pam, God bless her, she had the whole bill written, and we got together at this meeting. I'll never forget it. It was a small group of that bigger committee at Children Specialized in this back conference room. And I said, gang, look what I found here. It was a statement that said, and I'm paraphrasing for the most part, if the bills were written the way Oklahoma wrote and defined recreation therapy, we really wouldn't oppose it. So we went back and fought and redid our wording so that we made it that way. And so in hopes that that would deter another thing that would stop a big battle. I have to say, as Caitlin went through our timeline, we hit no opposition from anyone at all. It was smooth sailing. And we, all of us to this day, keep saying and pinching ourselves, did this really happen? Did it really go through that way?
Dina, just to interject as well, I know that in the beginning, Caitlin did mention the activity professionals, and that was a concern. When we were writing the bill, we also took that into consideration that in New Jersey regulation, the director of a activities department in a long-term care facility can either be a CTRS or an ADC, an activity director certified. And so in the past, we had gotten information that the activity directors would be very concerned if we went for licensure, that we would block their jobs. And so Caitlin and I actually got on a conference call with the New Jersey representative of activity professionals to basically allay their fears that we were not doing this to remove their eligibility for jobs in long-term care, and that we would be very careful in the language. And so, like Dina said, in the long run, it really paid off for us because they did not come out to oppose our legislation, and we did not hear anything from them. Thanks, Dina.
Yep. Nope, please chime in. We continue to be a team effort, as you can see. So who is eligible for licensure in New Jersey? One of the things that another thing that was our discussion, how do we want to approach this? Some states require an exam. What do we want to do? That was equally as important of our discussion. And we felt, let's make it easy on all of us, on all of our fellow CTRSs, and on the state of New Jersey, that they wouldn't have to have all these people doing all this work. And we felt that the CTRS was the golden standard, that it is, there is a wonderful exam that stresses many of us out when we have to take it. There is it is our golden seal, and why change that? So we pretty much went with, if you are a CTRS in good standing and have kept and are active and pay your dues, then you are eligible for licensure in New Jersey. So you must you have to be 18 years of old, good moral character. You have to submit to the board evidence of having completed a bachelor level program or higher in recreation therapy or TR, bachelor level program or higher in a related field, which includes courses pertaining to rec therapy, as required by NCTRC. We really looked at those standards and wording. You're gonna have to submit to the board evidence of having successfully completed all the certification requirements and maintenance requirements as deemed by NCTRC at whatever time in their process. So we didn't list all those specifics right in there, because if NCTRC changes, we have to change, and that would require the law changing. So we're just saying as how they deem it that we need to do. So we talked about the state board, and we are the State Board of Creative Arts and Activities Therapies. We are not under the medical board. We're not under licensed professional counseling. We are this own board, which is art therapy, dance, drama, music, and recreational therapy. So this board shall evaluate the qualifications and determine eligibility for all applicants. We will attest to their applicants' professional qualifications to practice as licensed recreational therapists in New Jersey. We will issue and renew licenses pursuant to the provisions of this act. We will investigate allegations of conduct in hearings regarding misconduct, violations in this act. So if someone says so-and-so at this agency is calling themselves a recreation therapist and they're not CTRS, that would fall back on the state board to look at and investigate it. And we have the ability then to suspend, revoke, or fail to renew a license of a recreational therapist pursuant to that law. Power. I love it when you read it. Continuing on, we will maintain a list of the names and addresses of all the licensed rec therapists that will be licensed under this act. We have to establish standards for the continuing education of recreational therapists. We have to prescribe or recommend fee changes or fees for the licensures, renewals, and other services that might be performed. We have to promulgate rules and regs to carry out this legislation. So for those not familiar with the legislative process and public policy and all of that, you get a piece of legislation. I think it's pretty much the same in most states, correct, Pam? That you have a piece of legislation that's posed, and then you have regulations that are passed separately that are pretty much the work, how you accomplish meeting that law. And that, so that would be this board doing. We shall, next slide, please. We'll issue the applicant license out, who in our opinion has met the requirements of this act. They will be for a 2-year period that you would have to pay, and then submit an application for renewal and the fee for renewal. So you're going to have the initial a person will pay, and then for every 2 years, a renewal. And we're really going to go by, you have to keep up with your CTRS in doing and keeping that going along. The minute someone loses their CTRS, their licensure is ended in New Jersey. So what was the next steps then after that? We had to nominate representatives to the State Board of Creative Arts and Activities Therapies. So some people have said to us, when it first happened, we got questions. Does that mean that we're now activity professionals, as Pam mentioned before, are now licensed direct therapists? No, not at all. They don't meet the qualifications of being a CTRS. If they do, and they happen to have dual roles, then so be it. But they have to be able to be a CTRS. It has nothing to do with that. That was just the name. In public life, in public policy and public life, sometimes you just have to give and take and compromise. And we just said, fine, we'll go this route. Pam, you want to chime in on something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Dina, this was another time when the lobbyist was absolutely vital, in that the governor's office called the lobbyist and said, hey, we really do not want to create another board, and we have to think of another solution if you want the governor to sign off on this licensure bill. And that's when they came up with this idea of just combining all the creative arts and activities therapy under one board, and we assisted in naming it. So I just think it's good to point out that I don't know if he would have just vetoed our bill without the ability of the governor's office just to call up our lobbyists and say, hey, we're a little uncomfortable with this. So I think that was important.
And I think, Pam, correct me if I'm wrong, and Caitlin, didn't he veto the dance and drama therapy bill?
And the governor's office then went back to them and said, hey, and it was contingent on this, I believe. And they said, if you'll go in on this combined board, we'll allow this to move forward. Yeah, so there was a lot going on right then. I remember joining conference calls in my car.
Yeah, and I think that, they were, I think they were not sure they wanted to do that. They had to come to a decision, the dance and drama therapists, and we just kept pushing along. And in this whole process, back in 2016, our therapists were licensed and they had their own board. So if you read our bill, it basically dissolves that board because they now have to be a part of the activities, this new board. And so there are positions on that board that, yes, as a group we talk and work together, we would work together, but then there would just be 2 people representing recreation therapy. We also looked at the formulation of a recreation therapy advisory committee. This is separate from any professional association. It needed, as I mentioned earlier, now we made that full separation from any professional association. So if there are questions that come up to NJEPA or NJRPA, they don't answer them. They refer them to the email for licensure that we have, and that is answered there separately. But we are, in the process of bringing this advisory committee together that will be just separate on our own, working, and kind of the representatives to the state board will work along with them in these next phases of this process. We have to look at drafting the regulations for recreational therapists. Those regs then get posted in the New Jersey Register for comment. I happen to have what those look like here because some people have their weird things they read. I read the New Jersey Register on a regular basis for different rules and regs that come up that may affect the practice of recreation therapy in general. So they get posted there and then they get adopted, and then the CTRSs will be notified of this. So if and that will be through NCTRC. And we have kept communication with NCTRC along this process. And I think they were, I don't think I'm speaking out of line, they were kind of shocked it moved so quickly and so fast for us here in Jersey. So in full disclosure, Pam and myself, we have been nominated to represent this board, and only for the reason that we have such an extensive background in public policy and looking at regulatory issues, that we felt it was best to get us on first, get it set so that the future rec therapists coming in have it all, have the groundwork done and have a base, and they can just follow along on that. We've hit a roadblock slightly right now with that process, but in the meantime, Pam and I have met last week, and we have on our own have started writing our regulations for this piece of legislation. Okay. So what are some frequently asked questions? And this is something we also wanted to be put out there. I believe it's on the website too, so that people had some of those answers. You know, is it sought to increase respect towards professionals? No, it's about consumer protection. And that we want to make sure that our services are provided by qualified provider. And that is something we tried to look at too, was were there cases of neglect or harm to an individual receiving rec therapy services who that happened because the person was not a qualified professional. So we want to, that's what we're always looking at. And it's important that you all remember that language. My hair stands up on me more than it is right now. When I hear someone at a webinar or a seminar and talk about, well, is this going to increase our pay? Or, you know, how is it going to benefit me at my agency? Am I going to get better respect? Well, I hope indirectly you get better respect. But again, you got to stick to the main point here, consumer protection. Will I have to take an exam? Nope, we made it real easy for you. It's just the being an active CTRS. Do licensed rec therapists have to work a certain number of hours a week? No, provides a license only qualifies you to practice recreation therapy. It is the credential. So it doesn't say that. If NCTR says to be a CTRS, you must work X amount of hours. Well, that's a different story. But the license, having the license, that will not be a requirement. Why do you need a license if we are a CTRS? The CTRS is a voluntary credential. We've stated that before. Caitlin outlined the differences between the two earlier on in this presentation. Your state licensure law requires a CTRS as the qualified provider of rec therapy. So that's why we need it. If you're already a CTRS. If I'm not a CTRS, will I be able to keep my job? Simple answer, you'll need to become one prior to these regulations being adopted in order to hold your job with the title of recreation therapist, therapeutic rec specialist, TRRT, CTRS, et cetera, any combination. All of those wordings are protected. So I know some agencies that do have people under those titles, but they aren't CTRSs. They haven't been able to pass the exam. They haven't wanted to take the exam, and some of them are now actively working on doing that. And I believe Kane University is, which is where Pam is a full-time professor at, has been looking at ways and trying to offer some classes and help them out with their path to licensure, to becoming a CTRS and becoming licensed. Is licensure designated to protect my job, take jobs from other fields, or increase jobs for RTs? No, absolutely not. I think I've driven that to you before. Consumer protection. It can open up additional job opportunities. It may do that, but it's not. This is about consumer protection. When the regulations are adopted, will be obtaining a license be optional? No, it is going to be mandatory. If you are going to be still working as a recreation therapist, doing the outlined recreation therapy details that Caitlin went through and the services and what we described earlier, yes. What if I move to New Jersey from another state where I hold a license? So we just quoted basically what the New Jersey law states here. Upon payment to the board of a prescribed fee and submission of written application, we may grant licensure to that person, but again, they still have to be able to meet the requirements of being a CTRS. So I don't know if a state doesn't have a CTRS as a requirement, but has their own license, their own test. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pam, is they still have to be a CTRS. There's not reciprocity of licensure if there's no CTRS attached to that other state.
And that's correct. And I think one of the reasons we came to that conclusion is, what would have to happen is that we would have to look at the requirements for licensure in every other state and ensure that they meet what is intended by the Ctrs or by our licensure bill. And as those things change, all the time, it would have been a job to be able to ensure that every other state's licensure requirements or regulations met what our intention was. So that's why we decided not to do reciprocity, because we are not blocking any Ctrs from any state from becoming licensed in New Jersey.
So that leads in perfectly to the last one. Can anyone who is a Ctrs apply to be licensed in New Jersey regardless of where they live? Absolutely. So if you live in New Jersey but work in New York, absolutely. If you work in New York and you can apply here to be a licensed recreational therapist. We're not stopping anyone from that as long as they meet the requirements. Does licensure enable reimbursement for services? No. Do professionals have to pay for their license? Yes. All professions do pay for their own licensure. When you look at people who are licensed out there, they all pay for their own. A specific agency you work for may say, oh, we'll reimburse you for your license, but it's not their obligation to do that. You as a professional, it's your responsibility to have to pay those fees in keeping your licensure maintained. And that's all we have on those questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Pam.
Hi, everybody. So we did look to some of the other states to understand what were the benefits of their licensure bills, just so we could communicate this going forward to our own members and Ctrs in New Jersey. The last state to obtain licensure was the one we really wanted to look at, and we were lucky that they were willing to share information with us. And as of right now, we understand that in Oklahoma, by being licensed, it gave Ctrs access to private practice. It also had them able to be recognized by the Oklahoma Department of Education so that they could provide services in schools. I will, as a side note, say that this is one of the main blocks for New Jersey, in that the New Jersey Department of Education did make a decision a number of years ago that since rec therapists are not licensed in the state of New Jersey, they cannot provide services during the school day. And we, in turn, were limited, even though it might be in a residential facility that provides school time, we were not allowed, we were pulled from providing services during the day. We are hoping that when this all goes through and we're able to do the advocacy, that we will be recognized again by the Department of Education in New Jersey as well. And then thirdly, one of the things that Oklahoma did was pursue recognition to be able to provide community services, specifically in mental health. And they have achieved that since they received licensure. And right now they are working on pursuing recognition to get reimbursed under Medicaid waivers. So those are some of the benefits they've seen. I want to just put in a little story that occurred recently, and I don't even think I've talked to Caitlin about this, but when Dina was talking about the protection of the consumer, I recently was on a call with the clinical coordinator for a inpatient short-term psych facility. And I was asking if she had a Ctrs that I could place students under for purposes of their internship. And the response had been, well, I have a credentialed professional. I said, okay, what is their credential? I will look up and verify that they are a Ctrs. And she sent me their credential, and it just so happened that they are an ADC. And activity directors do not have the same training, and yet this activity director her title was recreational therapist, and she was providing the services titled recreation therapy on an inpatient behavioral psych unit. And that is in direct contradiction to what is in the regulations under NCTRC. And I had to inform the supervisor that that credential, number one, didn't meet regulations, and under licensure would not meet the licensure requirement. So unfortunately, it was right before Christmas, and she said I was ruining her holiday, but that was her problem. At least she received forewarning, is what my point was to her. Next slide, Caitlin. All right. So what we did, and I did a deeper dive when we presented in New Jersey so people would understand that. I just wanted to highlight in here for you some of the idea of how licensure is going to impact based on regulations in your state. And this is one of the things, we actually had a subcommittee in our committee that was going for licensure in New Jersey that specifically looked at all the regulations in the state, anywhere that recreational therapy or rec therapist or CTRS was involved in that regulation to determine if there was going to be an impact when we went for licensure. So we did look at behavioral health, we looked at physical rehab, we looked at long-term care, and we also looked at another piece that I'll talk about in a minute. So just to give you some examples, when you look at regulations under CMS, right, that they require, number one, that a hospital must assure that personnel are licensed or meet other applicable standards as required by federal, state, and local laws. So the fact that RTs are going to be licensed in New Jersey will apply to all these settings, because anybody that is covered under CMS, there is a state law, recreational therapist has to be licensed. That means anywhere a hospital employs a recreational therapist, they will need to be licensed. All right, so that is that example. We will be added to this list along with the others, but as you see, it says, you know, examples are. We are an additional example that is not necessarily listed there, but is implied. Okay, next slide, Caitlin. So that was a federal regulation, obviously, is it CMS. We also looked at state regulations. So depending upon the state, different states have regulations for all different types of things. New Jersey happens to have regulations for everything. But this is an example of a New Jersey regulation. This is in our administrative code, which is in the public record. And this is specific to short-term behavioral health facilities. And in those facilities, they define who is a rehabilitation / creative arts therapist, which is the provision of services under adjunctive therapy departments in short-term behavioral health. So it states that they will be licensed or credentialed by the appropriate association, et cetera, et cetera. The numbers you see there are basically the numbers of the regulation this falls under or this document. And then this additional waiver, just in case anybody had a question, the waiver actually, you can apply as a hospital for a waiver to the staffing requirement in cases of hardship, and is a limited term. So that is another piece of legislation that provides that ability. I wouldn't doubt that some facilities applied for hardship during COVID and may have been granted it for a period of time. And it doesn't have to be a year, it can be less than a year that is provided by the state government to say, yes, we'll give you this amount of time to adhere to the regulations because you're having a hardship. So the last line, rehabilitative creative arts therapist shall include rehab specialists, art, music, dance, movement, etc., drama, occupational, and recreation therapists. So right there, it is saying that the credentialed person in behavioral health in the adjunctive therapy department is a recreational therapist, which in the future will mean a recreational therapist with a license. Okay, in the state of New Jersey. The link at the bottom is simply to that spot in the New Jersey regs. because you don't want to have to go through all of them. Believe me, I spent days. Next slide, Caitlin. Okay, so the other place I looked at under CMS is I wanted to find out exactly how they defined recreational therapists. I believe this is in Appendix A, where they have the common terms. And so just to demonstrate recreational therapy, how it's defined, and it is provided by a qualified recreational therapist who has their Ctrs. It includes, but is not limited to, these activities and purposes, right? And it states specifically that recreational therapists should not be confused with recreation workers. I substitute the term activities professionals or activities departments who organize recreational activities primarily for enjoyment. So if you look at CMS made a differentiation between recreational therapists and activities professionals providing diversional programming. And since they made that specifically, to me, that gave us justification for how we were approaching it in our licensure law. So we also were able to share that with the activity professionals and say, here, we're going to adhere to this same policy within the state licensure law. And obviously we did not receive any pushback from them. Next slide, Caitlin. Okay. So this was the other area we looked into in New Jersey. We do have a civil service law in New Jersey, and there is a lot of employment under civil service. We were very concerned that we did not necessarily want to put anybody out of work, but yet we had to kind of draw the line at what would be a professional credential. So if you look at our civil service laws, which correct me if I'm wrong, Dina, probably have not been updated in a long time. But under long-term care, they have something called the Director of Recreation. All right. And as you can see, it does allow for many different disciplines to be the Director of Recreation with a bachelor's degree or 24-hour credit hours in a specific area. That is very similar to the alternate path under NCTRC. Then they do note that applicants who do not meet the education requirements can substitute a high school diploma and 3 years of additional experience in residential activities under this designation. And that NCTRC or a CTRS and an ADC or activity professional certification can be substituted for the education requirement. If you guys are not familiar, activity professionals need a high school diploma, then they need to take coursework and an exam in order to be an activity professional certified. So this, the civil service regulations does have the ability of somebody to go for their activity professional certification with minimal higher education. And so we felt that that gave those individuals a kind of ability to get certified and maintain their position within the civil service entity regulations in New Jersey. And if they already had the Ctrs and are practicing as a recreation therapist, then they will need to be licensed in New Jersey. Dina, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it all. I think the key thing that one of the key things Pam said about this was that it is very outdated and really needs an overhaul. And I'm not sure when that will happen with them, but it is outdated. But it is there, and we have to work with it.
Work around it at this time. We have been successful in getting like the daycare regulations changed in civil service, so I don't doubt we'll be able to get this done, but more than likely it will be after the licensure law goes into effect. Okay, next slide, Caitlin. Okay, so we were asked to leave plenty of time for us to answer questions and you all to kind of brainstorm. But I guess we have our first question for you is, do you see any specific immediate action steps, or what have you taken from this presentation that you think are the next steps in New York's effort to establish licensure? Or ways that you know that you guys could capitalize on the opportunity to move for licensure. I think that New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania have all been working at the same times towards this. And we're able to mention that it is moving forward in other states, which really helps to get the attention of legislators. I don't think it hurts at all that New Jersey now has licensure. I think it can only help the surrounding states to move forward with that effort. But can anybody in the participants suggest anything? And if you would like to open up your mic, or you can also chat, we'd be more than happy to share our session with you to help New York move forward.
Pam and Dina, we have a question in the chat first.
Okay.
Sonia says, could we ask did we get any pushback from the CTRSs who supported us in New Jersey in regards to the verbiage that all were somewhat forced to fall under, specifically creative arts and activities professionals? However, understanding that in order to move the process along, this was a thing. The term activities professionals being so cringy.
Good question. We did hold, and I can't even remember the number. We held many sessions at the New Jersey State workshops. Initially to introduce the idea of licensure. We had separate workshops that we asked people to come in and help us to kind of gel out how we were going to approach this and to have their say in it. We did put out, after it was approached that we would be named that, and we did have a couple of people kind of like, can't we just be our own board? And it was like, well, if you want licensure, we can't be our own board. So this is the option. And this is what the governor's office wants to call this in order to be able to have a broad name that covers so many disciplines. So it was questioned by one or two people, and you know, it's a good point, but when you're backed into a corner and there's really only one option, you kind of have to go with it, even though it is we say activities, but activities is a generic enough term that it includes music, art, dance, etc. And that's what was felt would encompass everybody.
Yeah, and to add on that, Sonia, I think it's important to recognize, we didn't say activities professionals, we said activities therapies. So there is that distinction there. The other thing is, at first, the proposal coming from the governor's office was just that we would be the Creative Arts Board. And that at that point, we sat down, the three of us sat down, and we felt we were going to get major pushback from music therapy, drama, and we're not creative arts. And we felt we were then going to get pushback, and that would become our stumbling block now, and not so much some of the other allied healths. So we felt, again, this is part of life and part of being, you know, I never was involved in public policy. It wasn't anything out there. And, you know, now the joke with everybody is, when's Dina running for governor in New Jersey? Or when is she going to run for office? But you just learn this processes. And I don't think it diminishes what we do. I don't think it takes away anything from us. I really didn't care where they put us under what board. Just give us our daggone licensure. And this is a way we could accomplish it.
Right. Because truthfully, you know, most licenses, you apply for your license, you don't know what board you fall under. So there's been, you know, there's plenty of that. Everybody's just going to see that you have a license as a recreational therapist, and not be concerned under what it falls. Other questions? Was there anything else in the chat, Caitlin?
No, that was it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I know there's a second question, you know, just from a perspective, if we you know, if there's people that really want to unmute and start asking questions away, now's the time to also do it so that we can make sure you get your proper CEUs.
I mean, I think I when this question was asked, looked at a few of the ideas, and it really goes back to where we were saying discussion. I think, you know, one of the big things, and I know that New York has had a lot of changes in your state leadership lately, and you're going through an election year. And I think that's going to be the first thing you're going to have to look at is what is your governor come January or whenever they're in, how do they look at licensure? How do they look at all these processes, and are they going to be open to this? And that's, again, sorry to say it, but that's where lobbyists can really help you. They can do their investigation, and they can really look at the climate and figure out whether or not this is something you want to go forward with, because it's a lot of effort if at the end of, say, two or 3 years, you're just going to get shut down because your governor at the time doesn't sign licensure bills. So you definitely want to look at the client. I see there was some information in the chat. Yes, so Caitlin has answered, just so you guys know, the question was, what is our designation going to be? And we decided to go with the Ctrs/L, which means you're a licensed Ctrs. So that's what we're going with. I also, you know, the beginner efforts, I think, was to look at the other health professionals that are licensed in New Jersey, who sponsored their bills, what committees they had to go through. Those are all kind of political questions. And the other thing is whether or not they will support you. We had many conference calls where we discussed who knows somebody who's high up in the leadership of the PT Association. And Dina said, hey, I know somebody, I will try to get through to them. Somebody else approached art therapy, somebody approached music therapy. Caitlin and I met with activity professionals. So we were reaching out. We did make the, as Dina spoke to before, the strategic decision not to reach out to OT to alert them to this, but we did look at their national website, and we looked for any information we could find on what their objections had been to previous licensure bills, and so that we wouldn't have to fight that battle. But I think, you know, really looking at your other health professions and reaching out, even with they may offer letters of support, which is really important. And I think the other thing, startup steps that I would recommend, and I don't know, you know, we started with what's our history and now going forward, but I think you have to look at who knows who, you know, maybe somebody knows a lobbyist. Maybe there's a lobbyist in somebody's family that you won't have to worry about. We were just so lucky that part of NJRPA's mission and goals was to support recreational therapy. And so that extended to them supporting our licensure, as recreation administrators do have their own bill in New Jersey. And so they didn't see any conflict with them supporting our licensure and helping us through with their lobbyists. And as a matter of fact, it was through NJRPA that Dina found and knew the mom whose child had been had an injury and had been treated in Children's Specialized Hospital, and said, heck yeah, I think rec therapists should be licensed, and I'll come testify before the government in Trenton. And she was, I think, really impactful in the bill being passed. I know she had me crying, so you know, yeah. It was definitely impactful. So who do you know and who's going to come out support you? You really need to talk about that. And then I think the other thing to reach out to, New York has a lot of universities that have programs, much more than just Kane. But as Dina referred to, Kane's legislative person was very supportive of this and was willing to make phone calls and contact the governor's office. And the president of the university, with a little pressure from his wife, actually wrote an excellent letter of support, which went to the governor's office, which I'm sure couldn't have hurt, because we are a state university. So that was very helpful. So you really have to look at really where are your contacts and who can you use to move forward with it. Caitlin, any questions? Are we at time, Dina? Do we have enough for their CEUs? We're always worried about that.
We're at
I
20
have
minutes to
another
3.
question.
Okay.
I have a question. Someone missed the beginning and they were wondering if we did speak about the process of securing a lobbyist. I don't know if we want to do a quick summary.
Dina, do you want to take that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
What
It
was
was
the process that we went through to secure a lobbyist? Like a really quick summary.
From NJRPA's perspective or for this
They missed the beginning,
process?
so they didn't.
They missed the
secure
beginning,
Oh.
so how did we
So-
secure a
okay,
lobbyist?
so the, knowing that we collaborated with NJRPA, the New Jersey Recreation and Park Association, we knew they had a lobbyist on that they contract with, and felt that it would be best if NJEPA could collaborate and partner that way, because getting a price for them to do it on their own was going to be tens and thousands of dollars. And it was easier to do it as an addendum to the already established contract that NJRPA had with a legislative services agency. So it was a seamless process to the NJRPA board of trustees had to approve it, and they were very supportive. As Pam mentioned, they're supporting RT initiatives, and they approved that we could amend, and then NJEPA paid additional monies to NJRPA. Hopefully that answers your question.
I think that basically, and I know it is cost prohibitive, and that's why I to join with another organization or find access to a lobbyist who's going to work with you. We were just very lucky that the Rick Wright, who worked with us through MBI, used to work in the governor's office, still had a lot of contacts, and was extremely supportive of NJRPA and NJEPA and the effort to have licensure, given his background. So they were extremely supportive, and that's really how you get it done is put the right group together, put the right team together, and move forward. And I think Dina and I are both, because we've had such experience, and we tried to do this many, many years ago, I think a couple of times to get licensure, that we really felt that we had just been spinning our wheels, and that having somebody who really knows how the government works and can make those connections for us was going to be extremely vital. And that was something we had learned through our work on the Public Policy Committee of NJRPA, that we had come to realize that. So that is one of the things that was vital in our process, and why I think it went through so quickly, and without too much trouble.
We have two more questions. The first one is, Victoria said, I'm happy you said a New Yorker can apply for a license in New Jersey. How and who do you send documents to? And can we have more information to how that can be done? So Victoria, that's still in process. That's what Dina and Pam were talking about with the regulatory board and getting together to write the regulations and the process for applying for the license. So that's not yet established.
Right. It does
is in
seem like,
process.
yeah, it does seem like it's been a long time, but just so everybody knows, the licensure law was passed immediately before COVID, and COVID basically shut down Trenton. Everybody was sent home to work, and they were all set to work on doing different things. So there was a lot of change, a lot of things that occurred that delayed our appointment to the board. The governor running again and different things like that. So, it is an approved position. It has to get approved through a committee and then go to the governor for signature. And he does verify everything in the background of the individual. So it is a little bit of a process, but we will hopefully prevail very soon and be appointed to the board, which we can then finalize the regulations and move forward. When that occurs, I am sure you guys will be seeing it shouted from the rooftops that our regulations have come out and a process is in place. Anybody who is a resident of New Jersey and is a Ctrs will receive something directly, and then we will put things out to the state associations, as well as I'm sure through ATRA and CTRC to basically alert everybody that this has occurred. And if you require a license, there's the procedure can be found on the website.
The next question is, can individual states that have license help to push things for other trying states?
It's a good question. I think that when we were going through the process, we did contact Pennsylvania and New York to learn more about what they had gone through and any blocks that they saw. And I think we learned from that. We did include in our information what other states had licensure and what other states had current bills before their legislatures. And I think that does help. So the fact that New Jersey has licensure, I am sure will help the states surrounding us. States are competitive too, and they want to have best practices in line with other states, and I'm sure that will help. I'm not too sure how much we can do other than advise.
Another question is there a sunset clause in our licensure law?
Good question. Dina, do you know the answer to that? I believe everything sunsets at 5 years or has to be renewed, I thought.
Yeah, I believe there's 5 years in there. I don't think there's any that are 2 or 3 years, but I think most of them are 5 years. And then the regulations you start the process usually a year before they're up, you review them. Is there any changes you want to make? They get published and you go through that whole process and people can comment on them. So typically though, it is 5 years.
Though I will say we do have regulations in New Jersey that should have sunset a long time ago or are still in place and still adhered to. One point would be the rehabilitation regs, which are sunset in I think 2015 and have not been renewed yet, but they are still in place. So they are still what everybody is going by from a, following them perspective. And I think the same for recreation and parks, Dina, right? The law actually had to be repealed for that not to be in the regulations to also be repealed. So even though it sunsets, there has to be some action taken, I believe, at least in New Jersey.
One more question. Wondering about recreation therapists who are not CTRSs yet. How long do they have to meet the licensure requirement?
Dina, did you want to take that one?
Go ahead, you can do it. You're on a roll. You're good.
So as far as the licensure regulations, when they go into effect, there will be a period of time at which you will have to get your license and submit for it. So if you currently are not eligible to sit for the Ctrs exam, I recommend that you pursue that eligibility and take the exam as soon as you can. So for instance, when the law was passed, actually, it was supposed to go into effect in 90 days. Once the regulations are printed, they will put a stipulation on these regulations must be met. And I would personally, I assume it's going to be 90 days, but I won't know that until we get into the board and the board has that opinion stated. But that's typically the process. this is something we had many discussions about, and that's why we've put so much information out there. I have had a number of individuals come to me because they did not go for Ctrs certification. They did not take their exams, and the certification requirements have increased, and they realized, oh, I have to take another 3-credit class in order to qualify to sit for the Ctrs. And so we do allow students to come in non-matriculated and to take the classes they need after advisement through Kane University. We also developed a postgraduate certificate in recreational therapy, which is basically 18 credits of specific rec therapy classes that a student can come to Kane and take, and then that will allow them to take the alternate path to certification, which means that they would then have to work under a Ctrs for 1,500 hours or whatever the NCTRC requirement is. I would advise everybody to look at what NCTRC's requirements are, because they did change that alternate path language very recently. So the licensure bill will allow people who do the alternate path to be licensed as long as they have met all the requirements for Ctrs, which means pass the exam, have the credits, and the hours. But yeah, they will have to be a Ctrs within the time period allowed by the regulations. Hopefully that answers the question.
Any other questions?
Nope. Okay. Next slide, Caitlin.
Thanks.
I think it says thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, the conference committee has our contact information. We appreciate your time. Good luck.
Yes, good luck. We are in support.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you.